up? Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Sierra and Crew channel. Today it's going to be about the Sierra part of Sierra and Crew channel. I know you've been needing more FaceTime with me, so I decided to give you some. So I wanted to film a series about how I became a parent and kind of like my journey in that. And this is going to be the first video of the series, and I'm going to tell you guys about how my pregnancy was with Rosalee. I've got two little girls. Margot is the younger one and Rosalee is the older one. So yeah, it was kind of a crazy story, and just want to tell you before I jump into it, like, don't be freaked out if you're pregnant or something and watching this. Everyone has a different pregnancy journey. This does not mean it's going to be yours. This is a bit dramatic of a story. That's what makes it so fun to tell. And if you're a dude and you're watching this, like, I'm sorry, it might be totally TMI, but it should be really entertaining, so enjoy. Okay, so I've got to give you guys some background to really appreciate this story. And first I get to tell you about how it was in my adolescent years having a period. I had the worst cramps on my period. It was HE double hockey sticks. Even like the day before I had my period, I remember one time I had a track meet and I did the 100-meter hurdles, and I just finished my sprint, and it was at a track meet, and I got like waves of, it felt like contractions, and I really can say that because I have had kids before. It felt like contractions, like quick contractions, and it was so severe of pain. I like had to run to the bathroom, and I ended up, like, you know, you're like in the bathroom like, okay, you're not gonna die, you're okay, and I'd vomit, and that's gross. And I did that a couple of times. If I ever tried to do like super strenuous activity like the day before my period, which I wouldn't really know because I wasn't bleeding yet, I would go on a run and come into the house. My little siblings, I have like a huge age gap between me and my siblings. I'd be like, get me some ice, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, okay, she's dying, and they'd go and get ice, and sometimes it'd help. And like, I was the teenager that had ice packs like stuck in my pant line right up against my stomach. I didn't know that you could like get freezer burn, and I never did. I don't know if I just was like putting off that much heat in my abdominal area. I would never put anything to protect my skin, and I'd like try to freeze the crap out of my uterus. And that was the only thing that helped. That and ibuprofen. Oh my gosh, ibuprofen was my friend. So my periods sucked. Like, they sucked rocks. And fast forward, I got married when I was 19, and a couple years later I finished college and decided, like, you know what, I'd like to start a family. Curtis, let's start a family. And then I went off, well, I don't even think I'd been off birth control at that point. Anyways, so I started having really bad cramps, like abdominal pain, like cramps like right down there, you know, and like they were really bad. I would run to the bathroom like in my adolescent years and like curl up in a ball, you know, like, okay, I'm not gonna die, I'm okay, I'm gonna live through this, it's gonna be okay. It's kind of sad if you've ever had to literally talk yourself through being in that much pain. You're like, okay, like, Sierra, like, I'd have to say my name, like, Sierra, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, you're not gonna die, just keep breathing. Anyways, so I'd find myself in the bathroom giving myself my mantra, and sometimes I would just like lay on the floor, cold tile floor, like take off my shirt and just be like topless naked, like unzip my pants, like cool tile floor, and hopefully that would help. And sometimes I'd like throw up and sometimes I wouldn't. And I hadn't like started bleeding, but I knew that in the past I would have severe cramps even before I started my period, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna be on my period, and never started bleeding. I actually started training for a billing position. My dad was a physician at this pediatric clinic, and I started training for billing, and was having this severe abdominal pain. Curtis, my husband, had flown to Pennsylvania and was doing a training, or I don't know if it was like a training or like a meeting of sorts, resort, I don't know, I'm pretty sure it was a training. And so we were like totally separated by distance, and so my dad finally was like, look, I've heard that you have been in a lot of pain. Are you on your period? I'm like, yeah, I'm on my period. I just haven't started bleeding yet. He's like, okay, take a pregnancy test. And up until that point, I hadn't even thought about whether or not I was pregnant. Like, I understand in the video, this video, I did say like, oh yeah, we thought about having kids. Yeah, like maybe the week before, okay? So I had been on birth control this whole time. And I hadn't even, like, it was a shock to my whole body to even think, like, oh, I'm gonna have to take a pregnancy test. Like, I've never had to take a pregnancy test, ever. Like, I never, ever thought I was pregnant, always on birth control. And, I honestly, like, didn't even want to take the test. I didn't want it to be positive. Like, I wasn't even around my husband. If I was gonna have a kid, I wanted to be excited with him and like surprise him and share the news, and he wasn't even around. And I was having such severe pain that, I mean, you would think that the pregnancy was not a healthy one for whatever reason, because it should not be that painful. And so mentally, I had a tough time. I ended up taking the pregnancy test and it was positive. And I didn't even tell Curtis right off the bat because, you know, my parents and my dad, who is a pediatrician, has, you know, he's a physician. Oh my gosh, just got something in my eye, I swear. We were thinking it might have been an ectopic pregnancy, because those typically, if they're in the wrong place, like ectopic means that they're just, you're pregnant, the egg is not where it should be located in your uterus, so that it can be quite painful, and sometimes it's in your fallopian tube and can cause some severe damage internally and internal bleeding. So immediately we went, as soon as we knew that the pregnancy test was positive, to the hospital to get an ultrasound. Usually it's just like on the top of your belly, and for me, since if I was pregnant, I was only like 4 weeks pregnant, I got this seriously awesome vaginal ultrasound. Yeah, don't recommend. I don't recommend. It's not a fun time. But they checked everything out. I got some blood drawn to check my HCG, my human growth hormone levels, which are supposed to obviously increase when you're creating a human that's growing inside of you. And so the ultrasound came back, you know, looking fine. I had a pregnancy. I was pregnant. I was like, I had a thing. I had a really small thing. I was only 4 weeks and like 5 days pregnant, and I had a thing. It was real, and it like did not feel real. And at that point, I had to tell Curtis. I had some follow-up tests for like 5 days from then to double check my human growth hormone levels to make sure they're still increasing, that I still had like a viable, healthy pregnancy, and also to make sure that the baby had grown, you know, what's like the amount. I don't even know if it was like a baby. I don't even know if it had a gestational sac at that point. This little bitty thing. Anyways, so I went back to my parents' house and called Curtis, and I mean, like, how do you break the news to someone? Like, hey, I'm pretty sure that's how the conversation went. something to tell you. I don't want you to be very excited. I don't want you to be very worried, because we just don't have enough information yet. But I'm pregnant, and yep, I don't even know whether or not to be excited, because I've been in so much pain lately that I mean, we verified it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy, but still, you'd think that something's wrong. And Curtis is all the way in Pennsylvania, and he's like, okay. He's such a practical dude. I don't even know for sure what his like emotional reaction was, but he knew that logically we needed more information, and you know, if I was pregnant, then that was great. We decided 1 week prior that we wanted to start a family. And anyways, continued to have several days where I was running to the bathroom, maybe going to the bathroom, usually vomiting, telling myself I wasn't gonna die, etc., etc. And we planned for my college graduation and for my sister's high school graduation to take a trip to France and to Belgium. And guess what? Like 7 days after I found out I was pregnant, I was flying to Pennsylvania to meet Curtis, and then we were flying international to go to France and Belgium, and I was so excited, but I was in so much pain still. Like, an international flight, like, who's been on an international flight? You try to usually like sleep through it, right? I couldn't. Being stuck in one position was painful. Everything was painful. And but I wasn't gonna like not go. This is my first international trip, besides I think we went to Canada when I was like way little. And I was going. I've always wanted to go to France. My parents taught me how to speak some French growing up, and I did some French courses in college and still couldn't speak a lot of French, but I really wanted to be around people who did and see the Eiffel Tower in person. And anyways, I tried to make the very best of that trip. It was awful. It took until now, so like Rosalee is going to be turning 3 this year, so like 2.5 years, for me to even feel positively about A, an international trip, and B, like, I want to go back to France, because I just didn't get the experience I wanted to. Like, okay, so at this point, I'm pretty sure I had a bowel obstruction. I was probably constipated. I don't think I'd ever really kept track of whether or not I pooped every day. I don't know. Is that just like an immature thing that you're just not like, hey, poop today, poop the next day? Like, I did not keep track of that. That's kind of weird and gross. And then all of a sudden, apparently it's very important, especially when you're pregnant, that you can like get constipated easily. And I think I was already constipated. That's what was causing my severe abdominal pain. Anyways, like, if I did poop, it was just like a little bit and like super soft, and I think that's what can kind of get through a bowel obstruction if you do have one. I don't know. This is me diagnosing myself. I don't know. But so like, I have some pretty specific embarrassing memories of where like we're sitting along those benches with like the gravel and the trees, and I think it was outside of Notre Dame, and I like had to fart, and I like leaned over because my abdominal just felt so crappy, and like leaned over to like fart. It was so loud. Pigeons flew. People along the benches like turned to look at me, and I just was like, oh my gosh, like, you guys don't understand. And my sister was sitting next to me, and we just like got up and like left, and I just was like, I'm so embarrassed. And trying to find bathrooms when you're in France is like kind of really difficult. It's not like in the US. Like in the US, you can just like go into a fast food restaurant, or you can go into a grocery store. And I know that we weren't very familiar with the area, so I don't know, maybe there were like grocery stores or something that I could have gone to the bathroom to, but it was like, unless we were having a meal and eating the food and paying for the food, then there wasn't a bathroom available. There were a couple of public restrooms, but sometimes you have to pay for them, and they weren't very like, what's the word? like there wasn't a bunch of signs, like it wasn't very easy to notice, at least for me. Anyways, so yeah, we went even to the Loire Valley. It was beautiful. The Loire Valley is where there's like a ton of castles. They're pretty spread out, like they're like an hour this direction, an hour that direction, but it's in this general area. And there was so much walking, like so much walking. When we were in Paris, we did like 6, 7, 8 miles of walking a day, and I like felt like I was gonna die for part of that. And then in the Loire Valley, if you wanted to walk around the castle, like you gotta use your own feet. It's not like there's a moped or anything around to drive you up all the staircases. So it was beautiful. I actually would have to sometimes sit down and not be able to really adventure and stuff because I had to breathe through the fact that my abdominal cramping would hopefully go away. One time it didn't. We were at a castle and there was like a path to the castle. Ugh, the bathroom was like all the way at the front of the path and the castle was like all the way back here, so we were like trying to make the way to the bathroom for me, and like I didn't make it. I ended up having to lean over this like graveled path into like this moat and hold onto a tree and like throw up over it. And granted, this is not because I was nauseous. Like I wasn't nauseous at this point. You don't usually get morning sickness at 4 or 5 weeks being pregnant. And it was so funny though because I was vomiting over into this ditch and there were like other tourists that thought that we were like looking over and like had seen something, and it's like, I just want my privacy to vomit, okay? Get out of here. Finding bathrooms was a main priority for me. Anyways, the rest of my pregnancy, came back home, you know, met up with an OB, everything seemed to be fine. I was about, man, 20, 30, I would say 30 weeks pregnant, and my OB finally, you know, when you are pregnant, they're monitoring the baby's development and the baby's weight and whether or not you have good blood flow going from you to the baby and stuff. And he told me that Rosalee's weight was kind of like dipping, like, so for their age, they're supposed to continue to be like on a chart, they're supposed to continue to be getting bigger, not older. As they're getting older, they're getting bigger. And Rosalee was kind of going like, she was going up and then she kind of like flattened out. And my OB said that he starts to get worried about that when they start dropping below the 20th percentile. And she had been like 22nd percentile, and then we went and checked up again and she's like at 18th percentile. And so at that point he was like, okay, you're gonna go see a specialist. And so we drove 2 hours to see a specialist, and there was a bit of like a hemming and hawing as to when my due date was. By the way, like, how can calculating a due date be so like up in the air? I knew when I was like 4 or 5 weeks pregnant that I was pregnant. Like, I'm sorry, but my body was not okay with it at an early stage, and there was no way. I mean, I was pregnant. And some people, when they're trying like fertilization things and, you know, calculating with the app, like, you know, that week, and still there's like a debate as to when your due date is. I don't get it. I don't get it. Anyways, so the specialist was like, well, when are you due? And I was like, well, my first ultrasound before I had a gestational sac, when I was like 4 and some weeks pregnant, was this date. And then I went to the OB and had regular ultrasounds, and they bumped back my due date farther. And so the reason why that was so important is they wanted to induce. They wanted to get Rosalee out so that they could make sure that she was getting the food that she needed and continue to grow, because for whatever reason, like, I had really good blood flow, and, you know, that's how they get their nutrients and stuff, and everything seemed to be fine. I even did like a ton of genetic tests, which was terrifying because you have to all of a sudden be okay with the fact that, you know, you take the test and then you have this period of not knowing what the results are. So you have to be like, okay, I might have a kid with Down syndrome and I have to be okay with that. I might have a kid with dwarfism and I have to be okay with that. Like, there's so many genetic tests that we did. It was like a panel of them, and it was terrifying. Like, I didn't want to tell anyone because I didn't want to tell them if, like, I wanted to deal with it myself, you know, like, I was having to be okay with all of these different alternative kids that I could potentially have, and I didn't want to have to tell anyone because I didn't want to have to continually update everyone on, you know, oh, well, we found out this wasn't, I don't know, it just was, like, more personal, and it might be silly to, like, have a hard time explaining that, but generally I'm a very, like, open person, and this was really hard. And so we got the genetic tests back, and all of them came back negative. Like, the baby did not have Down syndrome or dwarfism or any of, like, the hundreds of reasons why she could have been so small. So with that in mind, my OB and the specialist agreed that we should induce, and induce early to make sure that the baby is getting nutrients and fed and stuff like that. And my mom was very against that. She wanted me to continue to carry the baby. By the way, I'll have to insert a picture. At, like, full term, like after 30-something weeks, I looked like I was only, like, halfway through my pregnancy. I was very small. It was not because I was working out. Yes, I got sick. That does not guarantee that you're not going to gain weight when you're pregnant. But generally, like, I don't know if I'd ever, like, really popped. Like, I kind of had, like, an oval-shaped belly, and it was kind of embarrassing for moms to be like, so how far along are you? You know, they're like, gigantic. And I'm like, you know, 33 weeks, and they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. You don't have to make me feel bad. I already feel guilty somehow. It's my fault that this baby is not the size that it should be. And I mean, like, how can you not feel guilty? You're the one carrying the baby. It's not like the baby has any ability to do anything on their own. Nothing. Like, they can't do anything on their own. They can't feed themselves. Like, literally, there's a tube hooked up between me and the baby, and that's how Rosalee was growing. And, I mean, as far as we knew, ultrasound-wise, there was nothing wrong with the tube and nothing wrong with the place where the baby was living inside my body, yet this parasite that I was growing was, like, not necessarily dying, but, I mean, it seemed like it. Like, she was not thriving either in her environment. So, Mom wanted me to carry the baby. I'm so sorry. There is, like, so much pollen. Don't ask me why I decided to come outside to film this, but I have, like, my runny nose. Anyways. So, my mom wanted me to continue carrying the baby. Both the specialist and the OB agreed that I should induce, and the question was just when to induce. And I'd never even had a kid before. Like, I didn't know what regular labor was like, let alone an induction. And I'm actually not going to go into detail about that. I'm going to make a different video about my experience in my first labor and delivery with Rosalee. So you'll have to stay tuned for that. But it was terrifying and quite a bumpy ride. I did not want to have kids again for like 8 years. You know that didn't work out because Margot is like less than 2 years younger than Rosalee. But anyways, I'll have to do another video telling you guys about my first labor and delivery induction experience with Rosalee and how that turned out. And yeah, stay tuned. Subscribe down below, especially, this is a thumbs down, subscribe down below, especially if you want to see the next movie in the series. And we'll catch you next time.